This is a very interesting area that, in fact, me and my colleagues have been putting a lot of focus on, because if you look at how different countries around the world, not just in Asia, are dealing with the crisis, generically what you can say is they're all throwing a lot of money, a lot of resources into the problem. You hear of huge multi-million, multi-billion stimulus packages that are being launched by different governments. And if you go a little bit deeper into what these stimulus packages comprise, you would find basically that first of all, there would be the usual tax cuts and rebates. There would be a huge amount of infrastructure spending. There would be focus on education, retraining, reskilling of people. There would be focus on making for a more effective and productive government sector itself. And perhaps there would be injections into the financial institutions so that they would be prompted to lend more and hopefully create a more virtuous cycle. So these are some of the key areas. Let me zoom in on one, which is very common to everybody, which is the infrastructure spending. If you look at infrastructure spending for governments, you can roughly categorize it into two categories. What I would call the physical infrastructure, your roads, your buildings, your bridges, that sort of thing, and what I would call the smart infrastructure. Okay. The idea for this obviously is that they want to create jobs, they want to create work for companies, so the companies won't go bust, companies will have more work, companies will then hire more people, and they therefore create that virtuous cycle. But the way that we analyze is that physical infrastructure, you do increase employment over the course of the construction of the project. When you build a bridge or road or whatever, people do get hired. But when the project is completed, the employment level actually tapers down because you need fewer people to maintain the structures. Smart infrastructures, by which I mean things like national broadband network, government networks, wireless hotspots around the country, the city and so forth, rural connectivity. These kind of projects, you will also boost employment during the phase where you are constructing the project, building up the infrastructure. But beyond that, what happens is that infrastructure in itself creates new jobs, new employment, knowledge workers, people who get more attuned to the internet, to access to the web, and basically are uplifted in those skill levels. Obviously, you couple that with the appropriate reskilling and retraining and educational programs, you can actually create new jobs and potentially even new industries for the company, for the country rather. If you look at the situation of Korea, for instance, they took a leap of faith by investing very early on in broadband, and that has created huge industries in gaming, in entertainment and so forth, which was unheard of. So it is an opportunity today, I think, for governments to take a balanced approach to infrastructure investments, not just plunk all the money into physical infrastructure, your roads and bridges, but also to put a sizable chunk into the smart infrastructure. It's not a black and white thing, because even in physical infrastructure, there are ways to make them smart as well. So you're building a road, for instance, putting in the appropriate sensors at appropriate points on the road, bridges, tolls, and so forth. You can make various physical infrastructures intelligent, and that's where ICT and technology play a huge role in today. ICT is a very strange area, because ICT is an enabler as well as an industry. Okay? I think in many organizations, in many countries, many cities, ICT is an enabler of more effective working, more productive workforces, and more creativity. ICT as an industry in itself is also interesting, because the skill base that you build up from your people, the experiences that they've gotten, the infrastructures they have built, can then be kind of packaged and sold to other organizations or even other countries who are embarking on the same journey. This is obviously seen in examples like Singapore, for instance, which has had a very effective national ICT infrastructure and a series of initiatives. This is also seen in countries like Malaysia with the multimedia super corridor. This is seen in Taiwan with very much ICT-based manufacturing economy, and also in Korea with a very heavy dependence and investment on broadband. Government as a consumer of ICT, government is in fact in many countries one of the largest employers, largest single employer of the population, and as such governments have a very deep vested interest in the productivity of their workforce. I think the way that governments approach it is that basically they are faced with various challenges. One, with increasing economic constraints, they are faced with the challenge of how do you do more with less. So areas like shared services, for instance, instead of every ministry or every agency building their own infrastructure, whether it's a data center or a network, governments looking at ways of sharing infrastructure, sharing information, and in time to come sharing services as well. I think that's one trend that pervades all aspects of government, and they need to work towards that. Secondly, government needs to be cognizant of the lifestyle changes of people. People today, if you look at them, they do not always work in offices. They are very mobile in their lifestyle as well as in their work style. So governments need to implement systems which are flexible enough, which will take into account the mobility requirements of the employees. This is also in tune with the third factor, which is about sustainability. We are all very energy focused today. How do you become less carbon consuming kind of organization? So a mobile workforce, working from homes or working from an off-site place would basically reduce the need for travel, commuting, basically in jobs which are appropriately structured for this kind of mobility. So many governments and many organizations in the private sector are already doing it. Cisco is very much a mobile employer, whereby I spend about 25% of my time in the office and the rest of the time either on the road or working from home. So that's the trend for the future, and that's a trend that government agencies also need to take into account of as well.